Thank you all for joining us. We're excited to be presenting about some of our work here in New York City. I'm Lauren Drumgold. I'm a policy advisor with the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. I'm here with Tia, my colleague.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tia Schwab. I'm a policy advisor at MOFP as well, and I focus on sustainable procurement.
Yeah, so we'll give a quick overview about our office, share some demographics about New York City and food insecurity, and then talk a little bit about our food forward plan before I pass it over to Tia to talk about procurement. So first, our mission and vision. So our office provides strategic and policy advisement to the mayor and senior leadership on food-related issues, and we work really closely with city agencies, including the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, our Department of Social Services, our public schools, among others. And our goal really is to increase food security, promote access to consumption and healthy foods, of healthy foods, and support economic and environmental sustainability across the food system. So our current city's mayor, Mayor Eric Adams, is a strong supporter of improving healthy food access and the state of hunger across the city. Mayor Adams actually has a personal connection to this issue as he's experienced chronic diet-related disease. He had a diagnosis of diabetes a few years ago and was able to improve his health, reverse his diabetes through switching to a plant-based diet. So he makes it clear that he wants all New Yorkers to live longer, healthier lives, and he's definitely a champion in this work. So we wanted to highlight the level of food insecurity in the U.S. and in New York City. And so food insecurity is steadily on the rise here in the U.S. Food insecurity can take on many definitions, but one we use here is limited ability to acquire adequate food due to a lack of money and other resources. A recent national survey found that 13% of all U.S. households were food insecure in 2022, and over 17% of households with children were food insecure. And that's been a significant increase compared to 2021 figures. And in the U.S., we collect data on race and ethnicity, and it's an important category to disaggregate the data we collect as Black, Hispanic, Latino, Native American, and Asian communities, as these communities have experienced historical injustices that in many cases has left a continued negative impact on resource availability and health outcomes in those communities. There's a lot that can be said about this, but to be brief, tracking racial ethnic identities is helpful for us in understanding the disparities in outcomes and pinpointing initiatives to address those disparities. So to that end, nationwide in 2022, we saw that Black and Hispanic households had significantly higher prevalence of food insecurity, 22 and 21% respectively, compared to white households. Locally here in New York City, our Department of Health and Mental Hygiene conducts a survey on food insecurity risk, which is done by asking 2 questions related to worrying about running out of food and not having enough money to buy more. In 2022, nearly 40% of the adults surveyed lived in households at risk of food insecurity, and about 48% of households with children were at risk of food insecurity. And so in New York City, we see those racial ethnic disparities are also present as Latino, Black, and Asian New Yorkers had food insecurity risks that were 2 to 3 times greater than their white counterparts. And just to share some mapping of the city, these are the 5 boroughs that make up New York City, and these are a few indicators of food access. And so the first being food insecurity. This is actually mapped using data recorded by a national anti-hunger organization. The second is a ratio of bodegas to full-service grocery stores. Bodegas, also known as corner stores, are essentially small, independently owned stores that tend to have delis and sell sandwiches, snacks, most of which are often highly processed and unhealthy foods. And so this ratio compares those stores to grocery stores, which in comparison, grocery stores tend to have healthier options. And lastly, we have fruit and vegetable consumption. This is also surveyed by the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. And just wanted to highlight here an area to focus for comparison. The darker shade shaded areas for food insecurity, and that ratio shows that there are high prevalence of food insecurity and more bodegas than grocery stores in those areas. And then for fruit and vegetable consumption, the lighter areas show lower fruit and vegetable consumption. And so when we compare food access indicators to chronic diet-related disease, we see that the areas that have limited food access are also the areas that tend to have a higher prevalence of chronic diet-related diseases, including hypertension, which is high blood pressure, diabetes, and childhood obesity. So there's several programs available to support those in alleviating food insecurity. There's a few federal programs. Two that I wanted to highlight are the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP. This is available to eligible low-income households across the U.S. and provides monthly benefits to purchase food at SNAP-authorized retailers. Similarly, we have a special supplemental nutrition program for women, infants, and children. This is available for pregnant, postpartum, and breastfeeding mothers and their children, and includes a food benefit as well as nutrition education classes for mothers. And then a few city-specific programs includes Health Bucks. These are $2 coupons available to community members and SNAP recipients to incentivize the purchase of fresh produce at all New York City farmers markets. We also have the Get Good Stuff program. This is specifically for SNAP participants to receive free fresh produce and beans at certain supermarkets across the city. And then lastly to mention is the Groceries to Go program, which is available to patients in our public hospital system to receive monthly dollar credits to purchase groceries online for delivery or pickup. So just wanted to note, our office recently put together we do an annual food metrics report. This year we did food by the numbers kind of infographic highlighting the progress of New York City as it relates to food, highlighting some food insecurity metrics and chronic diet-related disease, as well as highlighting the different city programs and initiatives that are happening and how we're doing when it comes to that. So just wanted to share that if you're interested in learning more about it. And then now that we've reviewed the foundation of food insecurity, here we'll share more on the city's plan to address this issue as well as support the city's food system, which we call this plan Food Forward. In 2021, our office developed a Food Forward 10-year plan to map our road for improving the food system in New York City. Food Forward NYC emphasizes the importance of choice, enabling a food system where everyone should be able to access the food that they want, wherever they want. And to enable this choice, we need to support both our food workers and our food businesses. And to strengthen the sustainability and resiliency of our food system, we need to rethink our food infrastructure and deepen our connections with the region. So Food Forward NYC is organized around 5 overarching goals. That includes 1 being all New Yorkers have multiple ways to access healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. Within the food economy, drive economic opportunity and provide good jobs. Ensure that the supply chains that feeds New Yorkers are modern, efficient, and resilient. Ensure New York City's food is produced, distributed, and disposed of sustainably. And lastly, support the systems and knowledge to implement the 10-year food policy plan. And with that, I'll pass it on to Tia to talk more on sustainable procurement.
Thanks, Lauren. Like Lauren said, I wanted to share more about our sustainable public procurement work because many food insecure people in New York City access food through agency meal programs. So this may be our public school meal service, in homeless shelters, older adult centers, and more. So our agency meals and food are really the front lines of the work to increase access to healthy and sustainable food in New York. And we do a lot of work on the public procurement side of our agency meal service to ensure that the procurement of this food aligns with our values. So next slide. Thanks, Lauren. Each year, New York City spends over $300 million buying food and meals to serve to New Yorkers. So like I mentioned, this is in public schools, hospitals, detention facilities like jails, older adult centers, homeless shelters, food pantries, and more. And the goal of our Good Food Purchasing Program is to support agencies in aligning this food spend with 6 values: local economies, environmental sustainability, nutrition, animal welfare, a valued workforce, and transparency. So as part of the Good Food Purchasing Program, we collect data from our agencies about what food they're buying and where it comes from. And we publish this data on the MOFP website. Next slide. The purpose of the Good Food Purchasing Program is threefold. First, we want to increase transparency around the food that New York City agencies buy, prepare, and serve so that New Yorkers know what they're eating and where it comes from. Second, we want to ensure that our food spending is an investment in individual health and preventing chronic disease, and planetary health, reducing the impacts of climate change, and also community health. So reinvesting dollars back into the local economy. And finally, we also want New York City's Good Food Purchasing Program to serve as a model and testing ground for public sustainable procurement so that it can drive change across larger food systems. So for each value that I just mentioned before of the Good Food Purchasing Program, we've identified a metric that we're tracking progress on, and our goal is to see measurable improvements year over year. So in the category of transparency, we track the percent of data that we have that is suitable for analysis. So once we collect data from our vendors, some of that data is not complete enough, doesn't have farm level information, and year over year, we're trying to increase the amount of data that we collect that is complete enough to analyze. In local economies, we're tracking the dollar spend to New York State vendors and also minority and women-owned business enterprises in New York City and New York State. In the category of environmental sustainability, we work with the World Resources Institute and the Cool Food team to calculate our greenhouse gas emissions of our food purchases. And as a city, we've committed specifically to reducing our food-related emissions by 33% by 2030. But again, year over year, we want to see progress in this area. In nutrition, New York City has nutrition guidelines that are called the food standards. So for all food and meals procured as a city, they have to meet these requirements related to added sugars, sodium, minimum servings of things like whole grains, fruits, and vegetables. Animal welfare, we're tracking the weight of our animal products purchased, and we'd like to see a decrease specifically around processed meat, which we're phasing out this year, as well as red meat. And then in the valued workforce category, we don't have a quantitative metric for this category, but as a city, when you solicit bids, there's an evaluation made whether the bidder is responsible, and that ensures that bidders are adhering to local, state, and federal labor laws. So we're currently exploring different options for using this evaluation to assess whether our vendors are supporting food and farm workers along the supply chain. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about how we're making shifts in these values, just because the procurement law landscape is, of course, different in every city and state and country. So here in New York, we're using our contract requirements to require that vendors provide their supply chain traceability at the time of bidding and also at the close of their contract. Again, this is an ongoing process because often vendors will commit to doing so, but then at the end of their contract are unable or don't provide that data. So this is an ongoing process and definitely the focus of our work moving forward. Our procurement law does allow for a price preference, 10% for New York State products. So I know that's a little bit different. For example, in Europe, we do allow for a price preference for products coming from the state of New York, and also from products that come from New York City or New York State businesses that are certified as minority or women-owned businesses. So in both cases, those bidders can receive a 10% price preference. So their bid is evaluated as if their cost was 10% lower. And then finally, I know this is something that we've talked about before with Kantine-Zukunft, but we are always pursuing budget neutral menu swaps. So we can't necessarily increase our purchasing of local and organic New York State products while going over budget. So we have to identify ways to incorporate those into meal service while maintaining under budget. So we're often reducing our purchases of animal products. And for example, if we take chicken off the menu, maybe that's an opportunity to bring in organic chickpeas. So we're trying to make those menu swaps so that we're not increasing the budget while we're moving in the direction of our good food purchasing values. So how are we doing? We track our progress on the Good Food Purchasing dashboard, which is also on the MOFP website. Here are a few highlights of our most recent fiscal year's data. So again, here our total food spend is around $330 million. The agency with the largest food spend is our public school program, and only about $215 million of that total food spend is analyzable again. So that's that data is only complete for about 65% of the data. Both New York City Public Schools and H&H continuously have the highest transparency there. The total greenhouse gas emissions, 242,000 tons of CO2 equivalent. This was an increase over the prior year, but still represents a decrease since 2019. So that's definitely something that we'd like to focus on in the future. And as you can see, we also need to focus on increasing minority and women-owned business spend, as it's still 5%. So that noted, our strategy looking at the next 2 years is focusing on client satisfaction, because if we invest all of this money and time into increasing the values of good food purchasing and our procurement, if people aren't enjoying the meals and consuming them, then it's not, we're not reaching our goals. So this work has led, next slide. This work has led us to pair procuring whole plant-forward foods with an investment in a culinary workforce. Next slide. So in our public schools, we partner with a community organization called Wellness in the Schools. So a council of celebrity chefs made 100 plant-based, scratch-cooked, culturally relevant recipes, and these were tested across all 5 boroughs and now are being rolled out. And via cooks in each school, and then cook ambassadors at every school district. Next slide. And then recently, New York City was just awarded a grant from the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance to invest in culinary training at the Department of Corrections, so in our jail facilities, and also Administration for Children's Services. So these are kids in juvenile detention centers and in foster care. And so over the next 2 years, about 120 cooks in both of these settings will be receiving culinary training to implement plant-based whole food recipes. So really excited to continue this work and advance not just good food purchasing, but the goals of New York City Food Forward. Thank you.
Thank you from Berlin again, Tia and Lauren. That was a whole lot of information, and I'm sure that we have also a whole lot of questions in the room. I give the people a bit of time to process. I noted down the name of one of your programs, Get the Good Stuff. I'm sometimes really jealous of how easy it seems to come up with good names in English, and then I see our team sitting and trying to come up with like catchy names for programs, and we always have a really hard time. So yeah, Get the Good Stuff. I love it. I'm just gonna start with my own question before I hand it over to the audience. I was wondering if you can give us an idea of when New York moved from having single-oriented policy measures in the area of food to a more strategic food policy or integrated food policy. Do you know when? Yeah, do you have an idea when that happened?
I think definitely having a food policy office in integrated into the charter so that it's mandated to be around through every administration was definitely a step forward. So that happened about 5 years ago. Of course, the Mayor Eric Adams is really invested in food systems as an area of policy, but having an Office of Food Policy mandated in the charter means that through every administration and changes there will be an office focusing on working with agencies to advance this work. So I think that was really game-changing in terms of changing the way we look at food and how it intersects with other work that the city is doing.
All right. So I'm going to look into the audience. Gibt es jemanden, der eine Frage hat? Nicht schüchtern sein, einfach die Hand heben. Wir haben hier eine in der ersten Reihe. Ich gebe dir einfach mein Mikro.
Thanks, Tia and Lauren. That was, again, very inspiring, always to hear from New York City. And because it's always so inspiring, I would love to hear, if it's possible, two things. Are there any barriers that you face? I mean, just like in terms of like public acceptance within administration, whatever. And the second thing is, because you have so many cool programs and obviously also really do the data gathering well, where have you seen the biggest impacts, particularly maybe the food insecurity one? So have your programs be successful?
Lauren, do you want to take the second part of that and I can start with the first? Yeah, so I think in the good food purchasing work, at least, we've definitely seen a lot of barriers just in terms of, I mentioned a few of them, but the budget piece is always a really hard pushback. Of course, I'm sure all of our cities and locations face this problem. And I think just working with agencies and people to identify those first initial swaps that can really maintain cost neutral and make the small progress as we go. Another thing that I mentioned was that transparency in the supply chain. I know that there are other countries like Singapore and UAE who have a lot of insight into their supply chain, but that is not necessarily the case in the United States. And the vendors are often a little bit resistant to share this data because they're not exactly sure how it will be used. And they also want to keep private, like their cost markup on top of the food and labor. So they're a little bit worried about that. And I think part of that we've tried to address is just like the culture change and having ongoing conversations with our vendors while they're bidding and then also during the contract to show how this data is being used, and also the fact that we want to celebrate success. We're not trying to like name or shame any vendor, for example, but we want to highlight like which vendors are procuring from local farms or which vendors we have a really high transparency into their supply chain, which advances our goals and also allows for food safety. So I think culture shift, not just inside city agencies, but also talking with the private sector vendors has really helped move the needle. And then in terms of emergency food and progress and barriers there, I'll let Lauren speak to that.
Yeah, I can add on the program side. I think one of the like challenges or barriers is always funding. For instance, our groceries to go program, there's a limit on like how many participants can be a part of the program. As of early last year, there were about 2,200 H&H, our public hospital system, folks participating in the program. And so, when we think about like opportunities for expanding, like funding is like one of the things that has to come up is like, do we have the funding? Where can we find it? And so to that end, we're also, thinking about like reach, like how are we reaching the people that these programs we intend to reach? Like, are we reaching, low income households? Are we reaching like as I mentioned, like with the racial, ethnic disparities, are we reaching those communities well? One of the things that our city is working on currently is back in November, we launched a chronic disease prevention plan called Healthy NYC. And that really is set up to increase the life expectancy for all New Yorkers across racial ethnic lines to 83 years of life by 2030. So it's a really ambitious goal, but we're in close touch with the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene and actually submitted a proposal for that plan that works on expanding nutrition security and plant-forward food access, part of it being expansion of, these programs, Groceries to Go, as well as 2 other pilot projects that we'll be doing on food access. And then we're also our office is going to be running a healthy food access working group. So we're going to be convening city agencies, community-based organizations, academic institutions to really think through of the programs and initiatives that have come across the city, what can we learn from them? What are the best practices moving forward? And thinking through, what kind of commitments can, work group members come together to do to increase food security and food access. So we're definitely trying to make sure that as we have these programs, are we reaching who we need to reach and redirecting it based off that?
And I think the like Lauren mentioned, the win-win-win there is really helpful in addressing some of the barriers, because increasing access to whole plant foods reduces chronic disease. It's an investment in our local economies, and also reduces the climate impact of our food procurement. So I think as many people as we can get on board is helpful in addressing those barriers.
And I think it's Dina again speaking, and I think what you just said also highlights why cities can be so successful in implementing food policies that are actually making a change, because the cities are so close to the people in comparison to national governments or, for example, in our case, the EU government. So I think it's also something that former Mayor Bloomberg said. I don't remember the quote exactly, but he was definitely mentioning that him and his colleague mayors can make a positive impact because they are so close to the citizens of the city and can really see what they need and come up with programs that make a positive change. Now we have 2 more questions. We're a bit over time, but I think we will stretch it a little bit to give them the opportunity.
Hi there, here's Lydia Perico from the district Charlottenburg-Wilmersdorf, which is city west of Berlin. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I have a question about this project, the $2 bucket, I think. That sounds very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit more about this project?
Yeah, so that's the Health Bucks program. So there are $2 coupons that are available through community organizations and those who are participating in SNAP, that federal nutrition program. They're also able to receive those $2 bucks. They're able to use those coupons at NYC farmers markets. So that's really to Tia's point about supporting local economies and also incentivizing people to have the opportunity to purchase more fresh fruits and vegetables. So the health bucks for people within communities, community organizations can actually purchase the health bucks to distribute to community members, for instance, during any nutritional education programs that organization might be holding.
Thank you. Then we have one last question, but please keep it short. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much. Hi, I'm Nandini. I'm from India, a researcher on Food Policy Council. So very, very interesting to hear about your work and the kind of impact you're making in New York City. Well, I understand right now because it's a top-down project initiated by the government, of course, the impact is very large, and policy, as we all know, can reach a larger number of people. But to that extent, when you're implementing programs where you're reaching out to, for example, detention centers or juvenile centers, I'm wondering, while most of us will agree that they are great initiatives, but people who are at the receiving end of the programs, where they have to getting attuned to cultural changes in terms of what they have to eat, for example, or out of habit what they have been eating because of what's been available to them for the last 20 or 30 years, and suddenly they have to switch to a plant-based diet. Has there been any sort of conversation with those recipients, and have you faced any sort of barrier? And if so, what is it that has been done to overcome that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's definitely a great question. I think this pairs exactly with our food education work, because we've seen in our public schools, for example, with our plant-powered Fridays and meatless Mondays, you can't just change the food you're serving without including people in the process of developing new recipes and also talking about what the new food is and why we're serving this food. So the administration really expanded our food education work to every school in this year and next through grant programs with food education providers, so that kids who, for example, who are having like a plant-powered meal in schools know why and where that's coming from. Similar initiatives across all of the agencies in older adult centers, for example, there's food education that happens quarterly in those settings. I think including, again, the recipients in the meal program and design process is really important. So in that grant that I mentioned with the persons in custody at Rikers and the detention facilities, both the kids and the persons in custodies will be participating in the taste testing and recipe design, because then they'll have like more investment in ownership. And like I said, pairing that with the culinary training, we can't just give plant-based foods without making it delicious and relevant to the types of food that they've seen before. So that's really been a focus in the recipe design piece with the Chef's Council at schools, but also with Hot Bread Kitchen, the community org that's doing the training at Rikers, the detention facility. So it's definitely a great question and something that we're focused on expanding across all of the agencies.
Right. I'd say we move on to the next impulse. Thank you so much again for sharing your